Ethan Carter was not the kind of man who enjoyed being the center of attention. He liked to keep things simple, fix cars, go home, spend time with his wife Laura, and maybe catch a game on TV if there was nothing else to do. But life had other plans for him that evening, though he didn't know it yet. It was almost 9 o'clock when Ethan decided to finish up for the day. His shift at Greenfield Auto Repair officially ended at 6, but he often stayed late to help out with emergencies or tie up loose ends. The shop wasn't busy that night, so he figured he'd clean up his workspace and head home early. Just as he was putting away his wrenches, the phone rang. It was unusual for calls to come in so late, especially from outside the usual customer base. Greenfield Auto Repair, Ethan said into the receiver, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. On the other end of the line, a frantic voice responded. "We need your help. Our ambulance broke down just down the street from your shop. Can you take a look? We're in a hurry." Ethan frowned. An ambulance? That wasn't something he dealt with every day. Still, he couldn't ignore a plea like that. If someone's life depended on it, he knew he had no choice but to step up. "Okay," he replied calmly. "Bring it over. I'll see what I can do." Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the air as the ambulance pulled into the garage. 2 paramedics jumped out, their faces tense with worry. One of them approached Ethan, explaining the situation in rapid-fire sentences. "The engine just died on us. We were transporting a patient and now we're stuck. Please, we need this fixed fast." Ethan nodded, already moving toward the vehicle. He didn't ask questions about who the patient was or why they were in such a rush. All that mattered right then was getting the ambulance back on the road. As he opened the hood, he could feel the eyes of the paramedics boring into him, their anxiety palpable. The engine bay was a mess, wires tangled, fluid leaking, and a faint smell of burning rubber lingering in the air. Ethan worked quickly, diagnosing the problem with practiced efficiency. After a few minutes of inspection, he identified the issue: a faulty fuel pump. It wasn't a complicated fix, but it required precision and focus. Every second counted. While Ethan worked, the paramedics paced nervously nearby. One of them kept checking his watch, muttering under his breath. The other stood by the rear doors of the ambulance, occasionally peeking inside. Ethan caught glimpses of medical equipment and monitors through the small window, but he didn't dwell on it. His mind was fully occupied with the task at hand. As he replaced the damaged part and tested the connections, Ethan felt a familiar sense of satisfaction wash over him. Fixing things, that was what he did best. When the engine roared back to life after a couple of tries, he let out a sigh of relief. "It should be good to go now," he told the paramedics, stepping back to wipe his hands again. The paramedics exchanged relieved looks before climbing back into the ambulance. Without another word, they sped off into the night, leaving Ethan standing alone in the garage. For a moment, he watched the red and blue lights fade into the distance, feeling proud of what he'd accomplished. He hadn't saved a life directly, but he'd played a part in making sure someone else could. But pride turned to confusion the next morning when Ethan arrived at work. His boss, Mr. Peterson, called him into the office before he even had a chance to clock in. The older man's expression was grim, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Ethan, we need to talk," Mr. Peterson began, gesturing for him to sit down. "I got a call from Langley Motors yesterday. They're accusing you of damaging one of their ambulances during a repair." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "What? That's not possible. I fixed the thing last night. It was breaking down and I got it running again. You saw how urgent it was." Peterson sighed, rubbing his temples. "I believe you, Ethan, but Langley Motors is a big client for us. They've threatened to pull all their business if we don't let you go. I'm sorry, but I have no choice." Ethan stared at him, stunned. This couldn't be happening. He'd done everything right, followed procedure to the letter, and still he was being punished for it. Anger bubbled up inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was no point arguing with Peterson. The decision was already made. "You're firing me because some company says I messed up?" Ethan asked, his voice tight with frustration. "Do they even know what they're talking about?" "They claim the ambulance suffered further damage after you worked on it," Peterson explained. Apparently, it broke down again shortly after leaving the shop. Look, I wish there was something I could do, but... Ethan shook his head, cutting him off. Fine. If that's how it's going to be, then fine. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, and walked out without another word. Back at home, Ethan found Laura waiting for him in the kitchen. She looked up from her laptop, sensing immediately that something was wrong. Hey, honey, what are you doing here so early? Ethan slumped into a chair, resting his elbows on the table. I got fired, he said flatly, staring at the wood grain beneath his fingers. Laura's eyes widened. What? Why? He recounted the events of the previous night, the ambulance, the panicked paramedics, the rushed repair, and finally the accusation from Langley Motors. By the time he finished, Laura's expression had shifted from shock to indignation. That's ridiculous, she exclaimed. You saved that ambulance and now they're blaming you for something that wasn't your fault? I know, Ethan muttered. But apparently Langley Motors doesn't care about the truth. They just want someone to blame. Laura thought for a moment, tapping her pen against the edge of her laptop. Maybe we should get the story out there. People deserve to know what really happened. Do you remember Megan Dawson? She used to write for the local paper. I bet she'd be interested in this. Ethan hesitated. Going public meant inviting scrutiny, attention, things he usually avoided. But deep down he knew Laura was right. If he wanted to clear his name, he needed to fight back. Slowly, he nodded. All right, let's give it a shot. Little did Ethan know, this decision would set off a chain of events far bigger than anything he could have imagined. Ethan sat slumped on the couch, staring at the floor as if it held all the answers to his problems. Laura was typing furiously on her laptop, occasionally glancing over at him with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, she said softly. We'll figure this out. Ethan didn't respond. He felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Being fired was bad enough, but knowing that he'd done nothing wrong made it even worse. How could Langley Motors accuse him of damaging their ambulance? When he'd only fixed it, it didn't make sense. Laura stopped typing and turned to face him. Okay, listen. I've sent an email to Megan Dawson. Remember her? She used to cover local news stories before she moved to freelancing. If anyone can help us get the truth out there, it's her. Ethan nodded slowly, still unsure. What if it doesn't work? What if they just ignore us? They won't, Laura said firmly. Not after hearing your side of the story. You're a good guy, Ethan. People will see that. Her confidence gave him a small spark of hope, but he couldn't shake the feeling that taking on a giant corporation like Langley Motors was a losing battle. Still, he trusted Laura. If she believed they could fight back, then maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. The next morning, Megan Dawson called. Her voice was warm and professional, and she wasted no time getting to the point. Laura told me what happened. This sounds like quite the story. Do you have time to meet today? Ethan hesitated. Meeting a journalist felt like stepping into uncharted territory. But again, Laura encouraged him. It's worth a shot, she said. Megan knows how to dig deep. She might find something we missed. So, later that afternoon, Ethan found himself sitting across from Megan at a quiet cafe downtown. She was younger than he'd expected, with sharp green eyes and a notebook already filled with scribbles. After ordering coffees, she leaned forward and asked him to walk her through everything that had happened. Ethan recounted the events of the previous night, the ambulance breaking down, the frantic paramedics, and his quick repair job. He explained how he'd been fired the next day based on accusations from Langley Motors. As he spoke, Megan listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally asking follow-up questions. When he finished, Megan sat back, tapping her pen against her chin. This is interesting, she said thoughtfully. If what you're saying is true, and I believe you, it paints a very different picture than the one Langley Motors is trying to sell. Let me do some digging and see what I can uncover. Over. The next few days, Megan worked tirelessly to investigate the incident. She started by contacting the paramedics who had been present during the breakdown. To her surprise, they were more than willing to talk. Both confirmed that Ethan had acted professionally and efficiently, fixing the ambulance in record time. They also revealed something unexpected. The patient inside the ambulance hadn't been in critical condition at all. Intrigued, Megan dug deeper. Through her sources, she discovered that Richard Langley, the CEO of Langley Motors, had been traveling in the ambulance as part of a publicity stunt. During a press conference earlier that day, Langley had faked a heart attack to demonstrate the reliability of his company's new luxury ambulances. The staged emergency was meant to generate buzz and boost sales. But things hadn't gone according to plan. Shortly after leaving the event, the ambulance broke down, a major embarrassment for Langley Motors. When Ethan repaired the vehicle, Langley reportedly panicked, fearing that news of the breakdown would leak and damage the company's reputation. To cover his tracks, he fabricated the claim that Ethan's repair had caused further issues, ensuring the blame fell squarely on the unsuspecting mechanic. Megan couldn't believe what she was hearing. This wasn't just a case of corporate greed, it was outright deception. Determined to expose the truth, she wrote an article detailing everything she'd uncovered. The piece was thorough, presenting evidence from multiple sources and painting a damning picture of Langley Motors' unethical behavior. When the article went live, it spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with outrage as people shared the story far and wide. Comments poured in, praising Ethan for his integrity and condemning Langley Motors for their lies. Protesters gathered outside the company's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Fix your ethics, not just cars, and honest mechanics deserve better." For Ethan, the sudden attention was overwhelming. Reporters began calling him at all hours, asking for interviews. Strangers approached him on the street, offering words of support. While grateful for the backing, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the pressure weighed heavily on him. Laura did her best to keep him grounded. "You're doing the right thing," she reminded him whenever doubt crept in. "Sometimes standing up for yourself means dealing with chaos. But look at all the people who believe in you. That has to count for something." Inspired by her words, Ethan decided to take legal action. With Megan's help, he hired a lawyer named Daniel Harris, known for taking on powerful corporations. Together, they filed a defamation lawsuit against Langley Motors, seeking justice for the harm done to Ethan's reputation and career. As preparations for the trial began, Ethan found himself reflecting on how quickly his life had changed. Just weeks ago, he'd been an ordinary mechanic working long hours at a small garage. Now he was at the center of a national scandal, fighting against one of the biggest names in the automotive industry. Despite the challenges, he refused to back down. Deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about holding companies accountable for their actions and showing others that honesty still mattered. And if winning meant proving once and for all that he'd done nothing wrong, then he was ready to fight tooth and nail. Unbeknownst to Ethan, the real battle was just beginning. But surrounded by the love and support of his wife, the determination of a skilled journalist, and the growing chorus of voices rallying behind him, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the truth really could set him free. Megan Dawson was no stranger to uncovering the truth. As a journalist, she had spent years chasing stories that others were too afraid or too lazy to pursue. But this case was different. It wasn't just about exposing corruption or holding someone accountable. It was personal now. Ethan Carter's story struck a chord with her. She saw a hard-working man who'd been wronged by people who thought they were above the law, and Megan wasn't going to let them get away with it. After publishing her initial article, Megan dove deeper into the investigation. She started by reaching out to former employees of Langley Motors, hoping to find someone willing to talk. At first, most were hesitant, afraid of retaliation if they spoke out against the company. But after some persistence, one name kept coming up: Rachel Monroe, a former PR manager who had recently left Langley Motors under mysterious circumstances. Rachel agreed to meet Megan at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. When Megan arrived, she found the woman sitting in a corner booth, nervously stirring her coffee. Rachel looked tired, as though carrying a heavy burden she couldn't put down. "Thanks for meeting me," Megan said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I know this must be hard for you." Rachel nodded. It's not easy talking about Langley Motors. They don't take kindly to leaks or bad press, but what they did to that mechanic, it's wrong. Someone needs to tell the world. Over the next hour, Rachel revealed shocking details about the inner workings of the company. According to her, Richard Langley had orchestrated the entire fake heart attack stunt to boost sales of their new luxury ambulance line. He'd even hired actors to play paramedics during the press conference, though real paramedics had taken over once the staged event ended. The breakdown afterward had been a nightmare for the PR team, but instead of owning up to the mistake, Langley had chosen to shift the blame onto Ethan. He didn't care about the truth, Rachel explained. All he cared about was protecting his image. When the ambulance broke down, he panicked. Blaming the mechanic was easier than admitting the vehicle itself was flawed. Megan scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing with possibilities. This was exactly the kind of information she needed to strengthen Ethan's case. She thanked Rachel profusely before heading back to her office to piece everything together. Meanwhile, Ethan was adjusting to his new reality. Life without a steady paycheck wasn't easy, especially with bills piling up. Laura had taken on extra shifts at her job to help make ends meet, but the strain was starting to show. Despite the stress, they remained united, leaning on each other for support. One evening, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table flipping through old repair manuals, Laura walked in carrying a stack of mail. "You've got another letter," she said, handing him an envelope. Ethan opened it cautiously. Inside was a handwritten note from a stranger, thanking him for standing up to Langley Motors. The person wrote about how inspiring his story was, and included a small check to help with legal fees. Ethan stared at it, stunned. "This is incredible," he murmured, showing it to Laura. "People are actually sending money?" Laura smiled. "They believe in you, Ethan. You're giving them hope." As more letters and donations arrived, Ethan realized just how much impact his fight was having. Strangers across the country were rallying behind him, sharing his story and spreading awareness. Social media campaigns popped up, urging people to boycott Langley Motors until they apologized and compensated Ethan for the damage they'd caused. The public outcry grew louder every day. Protesters gathered outside Langley Motors headquarters, chanting slogans and holding signs. News outlets couldn't get enough of the scandal, airing segment after segment about the dishonest CEO and the mechanic caught in the crossfire. Even late-night comedians joked about Richard Langley's failed publicity stunt, further tarnishing the company's reputation. Back in her office, Megan continued piecing together the puzzle. She reached out to automotive experts, asking them to review the technical aspects of the ambulance's breakdown. Every expert confirmed the same thing: Ethan's repair had been flawless. The subsequent issues reported by Langley Motors likely stemmed from pre-existing flaws in the vehicle's design, a fact that pointed directly to negligence on the company's part. With all the evidence lined up, Megan published a follow-up article titled, "The Truth About Langley Motors: How a Fake Heart Attack Turned into a Real Scandal." The piece went viral almost instantly, drawing millions of views within hours. Readers praised Megan for her thorough reporting, while critics called for Richard Langley's resignation. Amid the chaos, Ethan received a call from Daniel Harris, his lawyer. "We're ready to file the lawsuit," Daniel said confidently. "Between Megan's articles and the expert testimonies we've gathered, we have a strong case. Langley Motors won't know what hit them." Ethan felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, determination, all swirling together. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew he couldn't back down now. Too many people were counting on him. The day the lawsuit was officially filed, Ethan and Laura stood side by side outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters. Cameras flashed as Ethan addressed the crowd. "I didn't ask for any of this," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his stomach. "All I did was fix a broken ambulance. But when someone tries to ruin your life because you told the truth, you have to stand up and fight. That's what I'm doing today, not just for myself, but for everyone who believes honesty still matters." His words resonated deeply with those listening. Cheers erupted from the crowd, and Ethan felt a surge of gratitude wash over him. For the first time since this ordeal began, he truly believed he might come out on top. But victory wouldn't come easily. Langley Motors wasn't going to roll over without a fight. Their lawyers countered with aggressive tactics, attempting to discredit Ethan and his supporters. They claimed the mechanic lacked proper certification, which wasn't true, and accused Megan of fabricating evidence to smear the company's name. Despite these attacks, Ethan refused to waver. With Megan continuing to expose the company's lies and Daniel fighting tirelessly in court, he felt more prepared than ever to face whatever came next. The battle was far from over, but Ethan knew one thing for certain: the truth was on his side, and sometimes that was all you needed to win. The trial began on a chilly Monday morning, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters crammed into the back rows, cameras clicking and pens scribbling furiously as everyone waited for the proceedings to start. Ethan sat nervously beside Daniel, Harris, his lawyer, trying to ignore the weight of so many eyes on him. Laura sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped tightly together, offering silent encouragement every time their eyes met. At the defendant's table, Richard Langley looked out of place. Dressed in an expensive tailored suit, he fidgeted uncomfortably, occasionally whispering to his team of high-priced attorneys. The contrast between him and Ethan couldn't have been starker. One a billionaire CEO used to giving orders, the other a humble mechanic fighting for justice. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. After a few formalities, Daniel stood up to deliver the opening statement. His voice was calm but firm as he laid out the case. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not just a lawsuit about defamation or wrongful termination. This is a story about truth versus lies, integrity versus greed. My client, Ethan Carter, did nothing more than perform his job with skill and honesty. Yet, because of a fabricated accusation from Langley Motors, his life has been turned upside down. Daniel then outlined the key points: how Ethan had fixed the ambulance efficiently, how Langley Motors had falsely claimed the repair caused further damage, and how the company had tried to cover up its own mistakes. He ended by promising that evidence would prove Ethan's innocence beyond any doubt. Next, it was the defense's turn. Langley's lead attorney, a sharp-tongued woman named Patricia Klein, rose to speak. Her tone dripped with confidence as she painted Ethan as incompetent and reckless. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, pacing slowly in front of the jury, what we have here is a classic case of negligence. Mr. Carter may think he knows cars, but the facts will show that his actions led to significant harm, not only to our client's property but also to their reputation. Ethan clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm. He knew they were going to throw everything they had at him, but he trusted Daniel to fight back. As the trial progressed, both sides called witnesses to testify. First up was one of the paramedics who had been present during the breakdown. Under questioning, he confirmed Ethan's version of events. He fixed the ambulance quickly and professionally, the paramedic said. It ran fine after that. Whatever happened later wasn't his fault. Patricia tried to poke holes in the testimony, suggesting the paramedic might be mistaken or biased. But the witness held firm, sticking to the truth. When Megan Dawson took the stand, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. She recounted her investigation in detail, explaining how she had uncovered Langley Motors' attempt to shift blame onto Ethan. Her testimony included emails and internal memos, showing Langley's panic over the breakdown and his decision to accuse Ethan without evidence. Richard Langley finally took the stand reluctantly, visibly uncomfortable under cross-examination. Daniel approached him with a calm demeanor, asking simple questions at first. Mr. Langley, can you explain why you staged a fake heart attack during your press conference? Langley hesitated, glancing at his lawyers before answering. It was a marketing strategy. We wanted to highlight the reliability of our ambulances. And when the ambulance broke down shortly afterward, what was your reaction? Daniel pressed. I was concerned, Langley admitted. I didn't want the public to lose faith in our product. So instead of admitting there might have been flaws in the design, you chose to blame my client, an innocent mechanic, for something he didn't do. Langley shifted in his seat, avoiding direct eye contact. That decision was made by my PR team, I wasn't directly involved. Daniel paused, letting the implication sink in. You're saying you allowed your company to destroy a man's career based on a lie? Is that correct? Yes, Langley muttered, barely audible. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and the judge had to bang her gavel to restore order. Ethan felt a mix of anger and vindication as he watched Langley squirm. For months, this man had treated him like nothing more than collateral damage. Now the truth was finally coming out. Throughout the trial, expert witnesses provided technical analysis of the ambulance's breakdown. Each one confirmed that Ethan's repair had been flawless, and that subsequent issues stemmed from manufacturing defects. One engineer even testified that Langley Motors had ignored warnings about potential flaws in the vehicle's design, prioritizing profits over safety. By the end of the second week, closing arguments were delivered. Daniel spoke passionately, urging the jury to see the bigger picture. This isn't just about Ethan Carter. It's about holding powerful corporations accountable when they try to silence the little guy. If we let them get away with this, what's next? Who else will they trample on? Patricia countered with a polished speech emphasizing uncertainty and doubt, but her words lacked conviction compared to Daniel's heartfelt plea for justice. Finally, it was time for the jury to deliberate. Ethan and Laura waited anxiously outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters. Hours passed, each minute feeling longer than the last. When the verdict was announced, Ethan nearly collapsed with relief. "We find in favor of the plaintiff," the foreman declared. Gasps filled the courtroom as the judge nodded solemnly. Langley Motors is ordered to pay compensatory damages and punitive fines totaling $2 million. Cheers erupted from Ethan's side of the room, while Langley's team sat in stunned silence. As Ethan hugged Laura tightly, tears streaming down his face, he realized the battle was finally over, and he had won. But this victory wasn't just for him. It was for every person who had ever been bullied by someone with more power or money. And as he stepped out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, greeted by applause and cheers, Ethan knew his fight had sparked something much larger, a movement toward accountability and fairness. The victory in court was sweet, but it wasn't the end of Ethan's journey. If anything, it marked the beginning of something new, a chance to rebuild his life and create something meaningful from the chaos he'd endured. With the compensation awarded by the jury, Ethan finally had the means to pursue a dream he'd long kept buried, opening his own auto repair shop. He named it Carter's Honest Fixes, a nod to the values that had carried him through the toughest months of his life. From the start, Ethan wanted the business to reflect who he was, hardworking, trustworthy, and dedicated to doing what was right. He chose a small location on the edge of town, close enough to be accessible but far enough to avoid the shadow of bigger competitors like Langley Motors. Laura played a big role in getting the shop ready. She helped paint the walls a cheerful shade of blue, picked out comfortable chairs for the waiting area, and even designed the logo for the sign outside. "This place feels like us," she said one evening as they stood back to admire their work. "It's honest, simple, and full of heart." When Carter's Honest Fixes officially opened its doors, the response was overwhelming. People came from all over town, and even neighboring cities, to show their support. Some brought gifts, others shared stories about how Ethan's fight against Langley Motors had inspired them. By the end of the first week, the shop was already booked solid with appointments. Ethan worked tirelessly, often staying late into the night to ensure every customer left satisfied. Word spread quickly about his skill and integrity, and soon the shop became known as the go-to place for reliable repairs. Unlike larger chains that prioritized profits over people, Ethan made sure his customers felt heard and respected. He explained, each issue clearly offered fair prices and never pushed unnecessary services. One day, a young woman named Samantha walked into the shop, visibly stressed. Her car had broken down on her way to an important job interview, and she didn't know what to do. Ethan listened patiently as she explained her situation, then reassured her. "Don't worry," he said with a warm smile. "We'll get you back on the road in no time." True to his word, Ethan fixed the problem within hours and sent Samantha on her way with a discount. Later that week, she returned with a thank you card and news that she'd landed the job. "I couldn't have done it without you," she told him sincerely. Moments like these reminded Ethan why he loved what he did. It wasn't just about fixing cars, it was about helping people. Meanwhile, the fallout from the trial continued to ripple through Langley Motors. Richard Langley stepped down as CEO shortly after the verdict, citing personal reasons. But the damage to the company's reputation was far from repaired. Sales plummeted as consumers lost faith in the brand, and protests demanding accountability persisted outside their headquarters. In an attempt to salvage their image, Langley Motors launched a series of public apologies and promised reforms. They claimed they were committed to transparency and ethical practices moving forward. But many remained skeptical, pointing out that the promises rang hollow without concrete action. Megan Dawson stayed involved, using her platform to keep the pressure on. She wrote follow-up articles tracking the company's efforts or lack thereof to make amends. "They can say whatever they want," Megan told Ethan during one of their regular check-ins, "but actions speak louder than words. We're watching." For Ethan, the attention gradually shifted away from him as the spotlight turned back to Langley Motors. While he appreciated the support he'd received, he was relieved to focus on his new life. Running his own shop gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. And with Laura by his side, he felt unstoppable. But not everything was smooth sailing. Opening a business came with challenges, and there were days when Ethan questioned whether he'd made the right decision. Supplies were expensive, equipment broke down unexpectedly, and some customers proved difficult to please. Yet every time doubt crept in, Laura reminded him of how far he'd come. "You've faced worse than this," she said one evening as they sat together after closing the shop. "Remember when everyone thought you were guilty? Look at you now. You're proving them wrong every single day." Her words always managed to lift his spirits. Together, they tackled each obstacle head-on, determined to build something lasting. As the months passed, Carter's Honest Fixes grew into more than just a repair shop. It became a cornerstone of the community. Ethan hired 2 assistants to help with the workload, choosing individuals who shared his commitment to honesty and hard work. One of them, a quiet young man named Jake, reminded Ethan of himself at that age, eager to learn and willing to put in the effort. Jake quickly became part of the family, often joining Ethan and Laura for dinner or tagging along to local events. Watching him grow under Ethan's guidance filled Laura with pride. "You're not just teaching him how to fix cars," she said one night. "You're showing him how to live with integrity." Ethan smiled, realizing she was right. His shop wasn't just about repairing vehicles. It was about building relationships and fostering trust. Customers weren't just clients. They were neighbors, friends, and sometimes even mentors. One afternoon, a familiar face walked into the shop. It was Rachel Monroe, the former PR manager from Langley Motors who had helped expose the truth during the trial. She looked nervous as she approached Ethan, holding a small envelope in her hands. "Hi, Ethan," she began hesitantly. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by. I wanted to thank you. Your courage inspired me to leave that toxic environment and start fresh. I'm working at a nonprofit now, helping hold corporations accountable." Ethan shook her hand warmly. "That's amazing, Rachel. I'm glad things are working out for you." She handed him the envelope, which contained a handwritten note and a generous donation to support his shop. "You've already done so much for me," Ethan protested. "You didn't have to give anything else." "I wanted to," Rachel replied with a smile. "You reminded me that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard. This is my way of saying thank you." As Rachel left, Ethan couldn't help but feel grateful for the connections he'd formed throughout this journey. Strangers had become allies, supporters had become friends, and enemies had been exposed for who they truly were. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. Ethan had fought for justice, stood up to a powerful corporation, and emerged stronger than ever. Now surrounded by a loving wife, loyal employees, and a community that believed in him, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. And as he looked around his bustling shop, filled with laughter and the hum of engines, Ethan realized something important. Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories. Months turned into years, and Carter's Honest Fixes became more than just a business. It became a symbol of hope and resilience in the community. Ethan had started the shop to rebuild his life after the ordeal with Langley Motors, but it grew into something far greater than he could have imagined. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about creating a space where people felt valued and respected. Ethan's reputation spread beyond the town, drawing customers from neighboring cities who were tired of being taken advantage of by big corporations. Word-of-mouth recommendations kept the shop busy, and soon Ethan had to expand the team. He hired 3 more mechanics, each chosen not only for their skills but also for their character. To Ethan, honesty and kindness mattered just as much as technical expertise. Jake, the young assistant Ethan had taken under his wing, blossomed into a skilled mechanic and a natural leader. Under Ethan's guidance, Jake learned not only how to diagnose engine problems, but also how to treat customers fairly. "You're teaching me more than I ever thought possible," Jake said one day while working on a tricky repair. "I never realized how much trust plays into this job," Ethan chuckled, wiping grease off his hands. "Trust is everything, kid. People don't just bring us their cars. They bring us their worries, their schedules, their lives. If we mess up, it affects them deeply. That's why we always do our best." Laura continued to play a vital role in the shop's success. She managed the finances, organized events for the community, and made sure everyone felt welcome. On weekends, she hosted barbecues in the parking lot, inviting customers and their families to enjoy free food and live music. These gatherings turned the shop into a hub of connection, where strangers became friends and friendships deepened. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the shop, Ethan stood outside watching the latest barbecue unfold. Families laughed as kids ran around playing tag while adults chatted over plates of burgers and corn on the cob. A local band played soft tunes in the background, adding to the cozy atmosphere. Laura walked up beside him, handing him a cold drink. "Looks like everyone's having a good time," she said with a satisfied smile. Ethan nodded, taking a sip. "It feels right, doesn't it? Like this is what we were meant to build." "It does," Laura agreed. "And look how far you've come, from that night in the garage to all of this." She gestured toward the bustling crowd. "You've made something truly special." As they stood there together, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The trial against Langley Motors had been brutal, filled with moments of doubt and fear. But through it all, he'd held onto his values, refusing to compromise his integrity. Now, surrounded by a thriving community and a loving family, he knew the fight had been worth it. Meanwhile, Langley Motors struggled to recover from the scandal. Despite their public apologies and promises of reform, many consumers remained skeptical. Sales continued to decline, and several lawsuits alleging similar misconduct further tarnished the company's name. Eventually, the once mighty corporation filed for bankruptcy, unable to regain the trust it had lost. Richard Langley faded into obscurity, his name synonymous with greed and deception. Occasionally, articles would surface detailing his downfall, but few paid much attention. The world had moved on, focusing instead on stories of redemption and resilience, like Ethan's. Megan Dawson stayed in touch, often visiting the shop to catch up and write updates on the impact of Ethan's story. Her exposé on Langley Motors had won awards, cementing her reputation as a fearless journalist. But she always credited Ethan for inspiring her work. "You showed me that truth still matters," she told him during one visit. "And that gives me hope." For Ethan, the past was just that, the past. While he didn't forget the lessons he'd learned, he chose to focus on the present and the future. His shop thrived because of the relationships he built, not because of the battles he'd fought. Every satisfied customer, every heartfelt thank you reminded him of the power of doing what was right. One day, a familiar face walked into the shop. It was Rachel Monroe, carrying a gift basket filled with homemade treats. Since leaving Langley Motors, she had dedicated herself to advocating for corporate accountability, using her experience to help others stand up against unethical practices. Her nonprofit organization had gained national recognition, and she credited Ethan for giving her the courage to make a change. I wanted to stop by and say thank you again, Rachel said, setting the basket on the counter. Your story changed my life. You reminded me that standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always worth it. Ethan smiled, touched by her words. We all need reminders sometimes, and honestly, your bravery helped me too. Knowing I wasn't alone made a big difference. As Rachel left, Ethan glanced around the shop, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Life hadn't been perfect. There were still challenges, long hours, and tough decisions. But he wouldn't trade it for anything. He had built something meaningful, something that brought joy to others. That evening, as Ethan closed up the shop, he paused to admire the sign above the door. Carter's Honest Fixes. It represented more than just a business. It embodied everything. He believed in integrity, hard work, and the importance of treating people with respect. Walking to his car, Ethan thought about the strange chain of events that had led him here. From losing his job to fighting a powerful corporation, he had emerged stronger and wiser. Along the way, he had inspired others to believe in themselves and in the power of truth. As he drove home, Laura sitting beside him, Ethan realized something important. True success wasn't measured by money or fame. It was measured by the lives you touched and the legacy you left behind. And if his story could inspire even one person to stand up for what was right, then it had all been worth it. In the end, Ethan Carter wasn't just a mechanic. He was a symbol of hope, a reminder that no matter how hard things got, doing the right thing always paid off in the end.